Welcome to Margin of Thought, where we make space for the questions that matter. I'm your host, Priten, and together we'll explore questions that help us preserve what matters while navigating what's coming. Artificial intelligence is already reshaping how children encounter information. And one question sits at the center of that conversation. What does age-appropriate AI in education actually look like? Today, I'm joined by Megan Barnes. Megan is a PhD student at the University of North Texas, longtime K-12 librarian, and a school leader working at the intersection of education technology and child development. In this episode, we talk about what young children can actually understand about AI, why the line between real and synthetic interaction matters, and how educators can introduce new tools without losing sight of curiosity, promoting literacy, and developmental appropriateness. Let's begin.
All right. So my name is Megan Barnes, and I am a PhD student at the University of North Texas studying learning technologies. And I'm also a librarian with 14 years experience in K-12 librarianship across the country. And I currently am an active practitioner in Dallas, Texas, where I hold dual roles as the director of my library, as well as the director of educational technology for early childhood through fourth grade.
Yeah, so lots for us to talk about. I would love to start with your research. Tell us a little bit
Okay.
about what you're studying, what you're working towards. Yeah, what are the questions you're asking?
So, really, kind of the driving question that started my whole PhD process was just sitting here and had this regular question that I would get asked, where I'd ask myself, is like, what is a age appropriate educational technology? Like, what does it look like for technology to be educational at a personal and academic level? How do we really assess these things? And how do we make it so that it's easy to assess as new technologies come out? I started this process. I applied before ChatGPT had kind of landed on the scene in a big way. And so I went from interview applying, ChatGPT, interviews. So I didn't start out being an AI researcher. It's really just going, as new things come out, how do we know what's important in the development of children to look at anything that comes our way? And then we landed here. So that's
Yeah.
a big part of it.
And so what does that look like now?
So right now, what that looks like is I partnered with some people. I've got a project where I'm actually researching how decision making is being taught in K-6 classrooms and going, are they using frameworks? Is this a general pro con? Is it different in different contexts? And that research is ongoing at the moment. I went through and dug and looked at some of the existing ed tech, some of the theory out there that said, like, this is how we analyze it, this is how you should think about it, and found that a lot of the frameworks were either highly academic and really good for writing meaty research papers, or they were more lesson plan focused. And so, how do we do this lesson? Maybe a unit plan, but not actually analyzing the technology itself. Now, I will give a big caveat to that because since then, I have actually found a framework called the Triple E framework that does a little bit of that. So, what I'm doing right now is using the Triple E framework in my professional life while digging into some of the neuroscience, both cognitive and affective neuroscience, to really go, what's the best way to look at this with what we know about developmentally appropriate technology?
Very cool. I think that intersection between figuring out so there's an author that I've been following since college, Harry Brighouse, who's written a public-facing book about ethical decision-making for educators. And one of his core arguments is that education requires a particular synergy between different disciplines. The reality of the data and the psychology and the sociology of your environments shapes so much of the decision-making that it really needs to be in conversation with those disciplines in order to come up with the right decisions. And so neuroscience and cognitive science are obviously super important when you're thinking about the impact on development. I'm curious now, how has AI changed the questions you've been asking? Do you foresee that your research will focus more broadly on education technology, or are you seeing a specialization in any way into AI?
You caught me. No. So what happens is as you go through this process of getting a PhD, You explore new things. I remember when I was getting my master's degree, got a piece of advice: if you leave your PhD program with straight A's, you didn't do it right. So, like, you should always be pushing yourself. And in my case, what this meant was going outside. And I've actually added curriculum design into my repertoire. And as I've reflected, I've gone, oh, I was like making things. I like building things in my house. I don't love the do it yourself furniture because of the whole, it's inexpensive. I do it because I actually like building my own furniture. And that's an easy way to do it. And I've been able to take that idea and bring the research into it. So I am working on a project with Edge AI. So instead of it being cloud-based, chatbot-based AI, it's actually like AI that lives on individual devices so that it is running one small concept and really driving. So you have Edge AI and like your self-driving cars and a lot of other machinery. And I'm building curriculum with that for that with a very large design team. And so what I've done is I've really dug into the idea that like it's not about the tool, it's always about the learning and the creativity, right? And so AI is the thing we're exploring and doing that right now. But the other issue is that you have to think about not only personal development, but like you have to get the skill development for you that you need for all of K-12 plus college. And ideally, in elementary school, you're building the foundations for life. And how do I make sure that what I'm doing is setting you up for life, not just specific skills and specific jobs?
Yeah.
AI is going to be a part of that, but really in elementary school, it's more what's the information literacy? How does AI work? How do we interact with it? Where am I seeing it? Where am I not seeing it, even though it's in use? So, like, I film our morning announcements. I've turned it into a video production, and we use a platform that is well known. I don't want to name drop, but
Yeah.
a platform that's really well known that has a background remover tool. And I tell them, this is AI right here. And they're like, what? So it's not that I'm becoming an AI expert, it's that it's just part of what we do. And as a librarian and an information professional, knowing who's generating information, who is validating information, and who's creating information is a really big part of that skill set across all ages. So AI is just another component in that toolbox.
In terms of that makes sense in terms of like seeing it as an element, like one element of many for what resources are available for the teaching. I'm curious about what unique threats from AI and how that's shaping what you all teach, especially with the library science component. Because one thing just like one thing I've seen a lot of is like a lot of the conversations about K-5 are centered on misinformation. Like the most useful thing we can teach at that age level isn't necessarily like here's how you prompt it so that you can generate like something. It's how do we get you to have concepts of truth and figure out what's real and what validate information. And I think as the technology gets stronger, I'm getting more and more scared about our ability to teach like the discernment skill between truth and falsehood. So I'm curious how you've been approaching it.
So I spent a lot of time over the summer thinking about this idea of AI in the hands of elementary school. And really, it came down to the fact that until I really have a solid concept of like real and not real, not even true and false, just real and not real, it's hard to hand them something that appears real and let them interact with it as if it's real. So I think about the chatbots that are designed to mimic characters or famous people. And I'm like, it's so tempting because it's so humanizing, right? And that connection is part of how we are driven as people. But if you are 8 and you don't understand that that's not really Anne of Green Gables, it's a very hard concept to pull back away. So for me, part of it is how do we help them understand that even though it seems very real, if you are interacting with the chatbot, it's just guessing. I used AI to build a game that reinforces the idea that what AI does is make predictions. And so I turned it into a quasi hangman game, and they had to guess letter by letter in the correct order what was supposed to be said. And each message has to do with how AI works. because understanding that it is algorithms, it is guessing, and it is math makes a big difference so that you don't go, oh, it's a person talking to me, right? We've seen a
Yeah.
lot of conversation about that blurring of reality and not reality
Yeah.
over the past year.
And especially when
I
like when you think sorry.
no, I was like, I don't think I answered your question.
No, no, that was perfect. When you think about the role that these companies are trying to play in our classrooms and the decision obviously to, put out products that create this human-like quality, to me that seems like a good example of some of the behavioral engineering and the misapplication of maybe some of the neuroscience and how our brains form connections. But what else are you thinking about? Because that's not something that I spent a lot of time diving into.
Okay. I'm going to start with saying I am not sure it is a misapplication. I think it's on purpose. We live in an attention economy right now. I heard a phrase just, I think it was yesterday, and now it's going to be a relational economy. Who are you building the best relationship with? Which model do you have the best relationship with? And I think part of it is this idea that it all started when we took away pages in Google. When your Google results used to be page one, page two, page three. Then what happened was they took the pages away. So you just keep going down to keep you on the platform. And we see this across many platforms. I think what we're seeing is that concept applied to a computing technology that is conversation based. And so it's really just that we're trying to, if you've got the history, if you've got the longevity, if you've got the skill experience by the time you're 18, 19 years old, you are potentially having a 4, 5 years of history with a product at the launch of your adulthood, right? So, which are you more likely to use? A product that you have an established understanding of, and maybe in I'm trying to picture the world 5 years from now. What does it mean to have 5 years of chat history? I mean, my Gmail is almost 20 years old. And so now imagine that, but like it's all of how you processed everything. So I think part of it is just trying to create that engagement so that you stay in the platform as far as like the really, really big players. And then there's also the idea that now they're going to use that it has become out that now that your chat history will be used for advertising. So that conversation that you are having with the synthetic idea is now also driving what you're seeing on platforms to get you to buy more, right?
Yeah.
I think that engagement that drives consumerism is going to become more of an issue very quickly. I don't like the idea that what I'm using for teaching is being used to sell me something. Or my students, not just me, but people.
Yes, the ads in particular do scare me a little bit. And it's not surprising. We all knew it was coming. Like this is not,
Mhm.
it wasn't exactly earth shattering, but I think seeing some of the examples put out show just how insidious this might end up being in practice. And when I was just like thinking, even adults and like college age students that I speak to approach ChatGPT or Claude or their, pick your top favorite AI tool with this level of deference and they see it as an epistemic authority, right? So it's like, oh, like the number of times I've heard a college student like they now refer to ChatGPT as just chat, and it's like, oh, chat said, or I argued with chat, and that is a little, it's frightening. And then I've heard adults say like, oh, like, I looked up this information and like chat explained it this way. And so this is where I think again, folks saw this coming in terms of moving away from like a list of resources that Google provided to a narrative format from someone who's supposedly talking to you and summarizing this, and how that changes how you process that information and process real versus fake. How do you even get if we can't get adults and college students to slow down and say, "Oh, wait a second. Like this is not someone who knows something." There's air quotes here for the listeners, but how do we get a kindergartner who's still even the lines are blurred even outside of the technology, right? Like between their imaginary friends and their fictional, like the books that they're reading and how all that's processed. What happens when you introduce tech that's not only as intentionally doing that to perpetuate it?
Okay, so this goes back to that question of what is age appropriate, right? I don't think engaging with chatbot based AI is appropriate at that age. And this is my personal opinion. This is my research opinion. I always want to be really careful, like when I say things like that, because, so first of all, the more layers of anthropomorphizing technology we give it. So I'm going to take the kindergartner as the example because that's what you use. Most kindergartners can't read or write. So how are they going to be engaging with that chatbot? Their voice. How is a chatbot going to be engaging with them back? A synthesized voice. And to make it more engaging for a kid, platforms might, I think I've seen this, have animated characters. We have gone from it's something printed line by line by what is clearly a computer interface to a conversation similar to what we're having. And that is blurry beyond blurry. I did not really understand how compelling chatbot AI could be until the first time I tried it using voice because I was busy and realizing what it sounds like, how it adds human inflection and pauses like the ones I add to try to humanify it was so it clicked for me how some people could go, it's real. I think the first step is knowing that at that age, if you're going to use it, it needs to be adult controlled and it needs to be a side by side conversation. So that's the same as media for kids that age from the American Association of Pediatrics, right? Is that it's co viewing, it's limited. So if your child is wanting to interact with a chatbot, it should be in the control of the adult so that you could talk to it, reinforce this idea that it's a computer, it's making its best guesses. Some of these guesses are good, some of them are not good, but keeping that in our heads as we work with it. I think it's going to be really interesting as these models get more sophisticated. Like, even just thinking about what it was like 4 years ago, like mind boggling. That question that's already starting to crop up to your point about true versus false is synthetic versus organic. You and I were just discussing the idea of writing and using or not using AI in the writing and revision process. So it gets blurry, right? At a certain point, if you let AI take over so much of the writing process, where's that line? You know, I know the popular thing is an 80-20 human in loop. You let AI do 80% of the work and then you do the last 20%. I was like, is that enough to make it like truly yours? It's 80% computer generated, but that's a slippery slope. And then we can't say who the authority is. When you've used a chatbot as a search engine, as a content creation engine, we don't know who's rating where these ideas come from, right? Like it's a black box. There is one platform that in theory, you can actually trace back to go figure out where it's pulling from its actual training data, why it picked that word. I have not had a chance to dig into that one yet. It's very interesting. I just remembered you used the word epistemic. And I actually did have a class where we were investigating the epistemic stances of different AI models. We had a team of, I think it was almost 25 of us working on these different teams where Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, Rock, and going through, and we had a list of just philosophical stances like what's the how do we actually learn what is information, can information exist outside of humanity, and what is the nature of the world, is there a distinct world, and going through and asking it repeatedly over time to see if it was consistent. That process is really easy. The data analysis is not done yet, so there's not anything I can report, but it was a very interesting process. And I know that there's at least one other organization that did something very similar that has reported findings where I believe, as much as I want to say, don't cite me on this.
You
I
can
would
put a
have
link
to,
to the research in the show
yeah,
notes.
that
That's
would
what we'll do.
be, yes, that would be an interesting read for sure. Just because this idea of the more you dig into it, and actually like from a critical lens, not just like using it day to day and go, it feels so real when you're talking to it with voice. But the more you ask it to be consistent and have some of those markers of humanity, that's where it falls apart. And so if our kids need consistency, which is what children need, we need it to be consistent across platforms and time and consistent responses to the same question.
Yeah, so when we think about maybe let's say K3, I would probably be in the camp of K6 or 7, but like the use of maybe we say, okay, like it's not appropriate to directly introduce that technology into classrooms at that level. You mentioned early on, like some other ways to start having those information literacy conversations with them to expose them in a very, very controlled fashion, or just even like start bringing it into conversation about how you're using it. The other side of this is that there's tools coming out for outside of the school usage of these. And that's what I was just thinking about. Like when you think about those little companion robots that they're create like pets, little like literally robots that will talk to you. I saw a tool come out around Christmas that was like, oh, like talk to Santa and the elves. And obviously the storytelling and like put your creation in and it regenerates things. Right. I mean, then those are all there's clearly a spectrum there that wasn't purposeful of probably how developmentally dangerous that probably is. Is there any research on maybe not even necessarily, obviously, there probably isn't on AI introduction at that age in those contexts, but like research on, you know, continuing to talk, like have these falsified narratives, right? Like I think um, there's a debate. Do you make your kid like believe in the tooth fairy or not? Right? Like, what does that do to like the parent-child trust bond? All of that. Now it's like, do you not only make the child believe in the tooth fairy? Do you like use AI to represent like the tooth fairy that they can talk to? Like, I'm curious what that does to a lot of these already existing conversations.
Oh man, when we my academic hat, I'm a little like, well, are we just manifesting the tooth fairy? Like, at what point is it no longer alive? If we have something there, let's say I'm just gonna take this to like the most extreme, right? Like, we're probably not terribly far away from walking robots, right? Like, we've seen some stuff coming out of not MIT, Boston Laboratories. You know, they've got some stuff that's like legit. We're probably Rosie the robot level before terribly long. You know, cross with Amelia Bedelia because it's still AI. And I'm just sitting here going like, if it's a robot and we feed it a story about how it's supposed to act like the tooth fairy and then it does all the tooth fairy things, what makes something the tooth fairy? That becomes the like, at what point is it just we've manifested what we want? Um, Now I know that's not the heart of your question. I kind of went in a ridiculous direction, but
But
that is part of it, right?
yeah,
Like at a
yeah.
certain point, like maybe the tooth fairy is just a robot and that's okay. But what you're, I got too distracted by the tooth fairy. Let me backtrack in my head.
Well, no, actually, I think there's where my pondering and thinking recently has been, but there was a recent Atlantic article about a tool that's made to mimic your deceased relatives. And that was another instance of where the founder explicitly talks about how, like, there is this blurring of, like, is this person actually gone if you can still talk to them and it talks like them, like, the vocal mannerisms are the same or the textual mannerisms are the same. And so, sorry, we're on a super tangent, but like when you just say like, oh, like where's the line between like it being real and it not being real, even for adults, like this is going to get very, very
It's,
confusing.
I didn't read that article, but I did hear, I think it was an NPR piece about it's either the same person or like a very similar situation, and where she built it as part of her grief process so that she could still have the one I heard at least And it was part of how like she wasn't ready to let go. But what she eventually figured out, she was like, I needed to talk to other people. And like
Yeah.
she was able to eventually just move on. But yeah, you're right. Like, what is the line between, again, at this point, we are having to grapple with this idea of like, what is humanity? What is, does a human have to be involved in information creation? You know, who is responsible when there's not? Who's ultimately responsible for harmful interactions? And if we can't guardrail those things, when is it appropriate to give it to anybody, right? Like I would say to give it to any kind of sensitive population. And at the end of the day, I think most of us are some kind of sensitive population because being human is hard. Um, do I want AI that can help me with my calendar? Yeah. Do I necessarily want one that's going to try to mimic what it means to be a human with my friends, with my students? No. But you can grade my multiple choice questions.
Right. But can you grade the essays like you're writing, right? Like even that, like the line so quickly becomes like, oh, like,
If
there is
if
something very human about your writing in a way
yes,
that multiple choice there isn't.
this goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? Like the difference between fact-based writing and philosophy or like narrative arcs and all of that. One thing that's come up again and again in the conversations about AI, just in general, is this idea that like it is making people less creative. And this is one where I'm actually not a naysayer about AI in general. I think I just have a specific lens that I look at it through. But every time there's an advance in creation technology and it adds to the toolbox that the everyday person has access to, there is a growth in the number of people putting out creative concepts, but more does not always mean everyone's great, right? So we're seeing a democratization of some of this. It's a little weird right now because we're having this internal battle of what is art, what is writing, does it have to be made by a human? And those are going to be questions that we're battling for quite a while. And I don't think there is a hard and fast answer. I think it's partially generational, and I think it's partially just personal. And so each person will kind of have to come up with an answer to that on their own.
We've put our philosopher hats on, and I guess that's kind of the point of the show, so that's okay. I can't take it off now. And so, well, the other thing I'm thinking is like an argument that I've heard is maybe we're just like being old, right? Like maybe like these developmental changes even are going to be part of like our evolutionary history. We should just like let kindergartners go all in on this, right? Like I don't think anybody's that's a straw man argument for sure, but you could kind of the point being that like maybe we do let like maybe our concerns and our hesitations and us saying, oh, that's weird, right? Like that feeling that we're having, how much of that is representative of some like moral truth or ethical good, and how much of that is just our discomfort because it's new.
So I think it's both. Like, honestly. But
Yeah.
I also think partially it's both, and this is definitely, like, compared to who I teach, like, such an old lady thing to say, but part of it is that experience, right? Like, "Oh, I have seen these technologies come. I don't think these conversations are all brand new. I know they're not." People made similar arguments about the downfall of Western writing with the printing press. So, like, it's it's gonna be fine. My bachelor's degree is in music. I don't think I mentioned that to you in previous conversations. I am a violinist. I still perform, and I was really into technology, so I was getting a recording arts degree. I've got this really long, like very fancy sounding bachelor's degree. My very last semester is when the iLife suite on Apple came out.
Yeah.
iMovie, not iTunes, iMovie, GarageBand, I'm trying to and iPhoto, the iSuite.
Yeah.
And I was taking a synthesizer class on how to use a keyboard device and how to play it in different ways to make it sound more like the authentic instruments is trying to mimic. Does that sound like anything we've been talking about? How does the human make the computer sound more real? I remember my teacher going, this is awful. It's going to be the downfall. And nothing's going to be the same. It's going to be garbage. And I was like, nah, this is really cool. This is going to make more people be able to be creative without some of the barriers. And at the end of the day, it's the same thing, right? It's a tool that allows more people to be creative. Are there more pieces of music right now that maybe would have been out there if GarageBand didn't exist? Yes. Are they all masterpieces? No, I've written at least 3 clankers. They were so bad.
Oh no.
I have one good version and I went one step too far. This is like, clearly this is a specific incident in my head
Yeah.
from my 20s.
We all have one. Yeah.
Yeah. But AI is kind of the same way, right? Like, you've got this new tool that's allowing more people to explore, which is great. Is it the downfall of humanity? I mean, no, it's another tool. I read a book called The Neuroscience of You, and I wish I had written down the author's name. Her definition of learning is probably my favorite one. Learning is anything you take in that changes the way you think, feel, or behave. Everything is learning. No matter what ends up happening, AI is part of learning because AI is changing the way we think, feel, or behave, even if we're not the ones interacting with it. So is it a little bit of my I'm no longer 20 hat when I'm like a little worried about what it means to give it to certain people? Yes. But that's also partially because we have an obligation to make the world as good an experience for everyone that are in our care. And so sometimes that means having to look at these questions, like the big philosophical questions, and go, is it right to do this? Instead of just going, this is how I can do it. Now, if I'm using AI in front of kids, it's at most a we do situation. It's usually, I had a fun lesson I did the first full academic year after ChatGPT. I think that was 22, 23. And what that was is I read a picture book biography of Marcel Duchamp, who put a urinal in a museum and called it art, right? The birth of the Dada movement. And so then we used 3 different AI tools to make images of like what would a toilet in a children's museum look like as an exhibit look like. And then we talked about, is this art as a conversation piece? But they were in the process. So if we're wanting to teach kids how to do that, it's can they differentiate between a person is doing this and a computer is doing this? And that kind of, we start with the grownups do it. And then the next step is like, we can all do it together before we release it with lots of guardrails, maybe in middle school.
And I think that it sounds like a good balance between acting on those intuitions to do what is right and good for the people we need to care about, but also part of that might also be that some exposure is necessary given where we're headed. But when
I'm curious,
yeah.
how do you feel about wonder and curiosity? When you think about the role of learning, not school, but just learning in general, where do you think curiosity and wonder fall in that process?
Gosh, when you use curiosity, wonder, and learning, my immediate thought is my college years. I was very, very lucky to be able to kind of spend those years following my own curiosities and marveling at things that I don't know if I would have gotten a chance to do if I had chosen a different discipline, a philosophy major. But I got to take classes on Sufi poetry and music. I took a class on the rhetoric of Lincoln and Douglas, class on social psychology. And it was completely fueled by curiosity. And that was a very unique time in my life. And I think that was the most I enjoyed learning ever. So I think my initial thought is like, if the intrinsic motivations for learning are probably rooted in curiosity and wonder, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think our education system is typically built to tap into that. And I think we're very hyperfixated on the extrinsic. And that can be something as simple as the sticker or the grade, but it can also be the job or the career or like, you will not survive if you don't learn, right? Like that is a very different way of framing learning. But I don't know, that's just like my initial reaction. I'm curious what you're thinking.
So this is where the fact that like I work in a school, which is like formal learning, right? This is a formal learning environment, but my role in my school is a librarian, which is an informal learning environment. So I support both the formal and informal at the same time. And I do work in a school that wants to foster that wonder. But to me, the best way to prepare our children for whatever life they lead is to help them know that you can approach new things with wonder and curiosity while still thinking it through. So making sure that we teach one, maintain, because I don't have to teach them to be curious at all at this age, to help them maintain that wonder and curiosity while giving them the tools to say, like, when I encounter something new, what are the questions I want to ask as I engage with it?
Yeah. But now that you're saying the library, I feel like that it does occupy a very unique space at that age level because like now I'm just like picturing myself walking into the library, like my school library as a, an elementary school student. And there was always this sense of like, oh, like there's so much to discover, right? It is a little bit more boundless than the classroom environment. And everybody got to pick their own books and you got to see what you were interested in and what was appealing to you even if there was already a pre-selected little cart of books because there was a certain project we had to work on and there was a narrow scope of it, but still there was some autonomy that came from that that allowed you to kind of preserve that curiosity and wonder. When you talk about not having to teach it at that age, I can't imagine like putting a college senior in a library and it not be very transactional in their head. Like I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but like very much thinking like, oh, what is going to get me to my next career goal? What is the most practical thing? Even like, oh, for sports or the music is no longer about, oh, I want to learn this because it's cool, right? I do wonder what role the library could play in preserving that or farther in our school system.
Okay. So here's my question for you. How can you harness AI to help people tap into and or rediscover their natural wondering?
Yeah. I mean, I think to some degree it does, right? Like it's just like organically by nature of like making it so much easier to get the precise answers that you're looking for and not have to do that digging. And like the reduction of cognitive labor that I think we sometimes are concerned about in certain educational learning contexts might actually be what enables that curiosity in other ones. And I'm thinking about like, when my wife and I were traveling to Mexico and we were at a historical site and we had ChatGPT on audio and we were asking very specific questions about just things that we were curious about. Like it was like, oh, like they said faro grows here. Did faro organically start in Mexico? That kind of curiosity was we were able to kind of sit with it because we got answers that were specific to that. And it's like you don't normally, if you're Googling things that you don't want to put that, you're not going to stand on your phone and like look at your phone and Google every one of these questions and read 20 sources to, keep going down that rabbit hole. But there is a niceness to that rabbit hole possibility in some contexts. But yeah, now that's a very adult context. I'm curious if you like in the school context, how that might be something you're thinking about.
But it is one where I get asked so many questions. Today's question at lunch was we were talking about YouTube and Google. And I looked at this third grader and I was like, well, YouTube is owned by Google. And he went, and then the other kid was like, is that why there's so many Google ads on YouTube? And so this was the kind of thing where what we want to know next is when did YouTube get bought by Google? If I used my phone at lunch in front of children, which I don't, that is the kind of thing I could have looked it up on a web search. I could have used a large language model to answer, but it was kind of good to just sit in the curiosity and wonder, and then they can come back to it when we have actual resources.
Huh.
Because getting back to the idea of how do you show true from false? How do you show real from not real? I not only have to know how to ask the questions and how to prompt things for the large language model, I have to have the confidence that is going to give me the right answer.
Yeah.
And that's where I still struggle because I don't have the confidence. It
Yeah.
has definitely led me astray.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that part is probably the hardest, and I think that's where like the how important is this thing to be real part definitely also. But that's a level of discernment that we've kind of learned and picked up on, right? So like we like intuitively we can maybe like gut check things a little bit more and know that like okay, this is kind of important information. I'm not going to just like rely on the ChatGPT creepy voice to tell me what the facts are or what the research on this might say. But all of that like has to happen, and we do a lot of that already at the early ages. It's about like doing it in a new environment now that I think we're trying to figure out. No, I was just going to ask, when you think about your role in the next 5 years, growth of AI and the changes, are you net excited or net scared?
In general, I'm excited, but that's just because I'm a little bit of an excited person. I do think that libraries in all contexts, as long as they are like open and really considering, are this really fascinating intersection of learning and creation and information literacy. And so from a library perspective, like I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to really dig in as professionals and go, what's it mean? How do we teach it? What are the skills that are transferable? And what are the skills that are domain specific? And the hard part is trying to do it while we're also just like dealing with the fact that it's here now. We don't have time to prepare. It's already, and that we have to be flexible because it changes. And so what works, and I don't know if you remember when the large language model images
Yeah.
first started coming out, people were like, well, you just have to look for the fingers. Well, the finger test is very easy to pass most of the time now, especially if you're using an image specific
Right.
model. And so go like, instead of going super detailed prescriptive, what are the holistic mindsets? And so it's just, I think that's where it is. And I'm excited. You're right. It is just change at the end of the day. I don't think that technology necessarily changes our brains in the way when people say that they mean it, but everything we do causes our brain to adapt. And when you do it younger, it adapts earlier. I think there will likely be a very stark difference for people who use it early and people who maybe wait a little bit. I think that could potentially be a dividing line later. And it's not good or bad. It just is.
At least we don't know if it's good or bad. It
Well,
might.
yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
thank you. I'm glad we
Thank you.
finally. Thank you to Megan for joining us and bringing both practical experience and academic perspective to this conversation. Megan reminded us that the most important questions about AI in education are not only about efficiency or access, they're about trust, discernment, and whether children are being introduced to these tools in ways that match what they're actually ready to understand. Keep listening as we continue exploring the ethics of education technology, and for more, order my book, Ethical EdTech, at ethicaledtech.org. Thanks for listening to Margin of Thought. If this episode gave you something to think about, subscribe, rate, and review us. Also, share it with someone who might be asking similar questions. You can find the show notes, transcripts, and my newsletter at preten.org. Until next time, keep making space for the questions that matter.